Now lecture of this academic year now, and good to see all of you here, and also welcome to all the people watching the stream. And we have the honor today to have Jiang from Blizzard, all the way from the US here with us. And Jim has been working as a CG supervisor in the cinematics team of Blizzard on different games there. And Jim has been now in Finland visiting the Northern Games Summit and also then visiting us here at Aalto University. So greetings also to all the Kajaani folks. And I guess we'll just jump into the subject. So Jim will be talking about his experience, kind of how he got into the industry. That's probably something that's on the mind of many of you. How do you find an interesting job in the games industry, and what kind of things do you have to know, and what other things to take into account? So it's going to be great to hear Jim's stories about this topic. So Jim, welcome.
Hello. I put it in the slide. It says hello. Thank you all for having me. It's been I've had quite a wonderful time in Finland, and this is actually my first time to Europe at all, so it's a great place. I wanted to spend a little bit of time today kind of going through my journey and how I ended up where I am, and maybe some of that information will help you. So I grew up in a very small town, well, not a very small town, in Texas called College Station, Texas. Named so because there was a college and a train station, so they named it College Station. As a kid growing up in a university town, there wasn't a whole lot to do, so I would watch a lot of movies, I would play a lot of video games, and I remember once when I was very young, my dad took me to his work, because he couldn't leave me by myself, and I roamed around his office unattended, because it was after hours, and I just started clicking on people's computers until I found one that was unlocked. And I noticed this application on there. It was AutoCAD. And it was the first time I'd seen anything like it. And it was just, it was magical. You know, it just really, I was like, what is this? And I hope I didn't destroy anyone's work at the time, but I was, I think, maybe 10 years old or something. And so I just started clicking around and zooming around. And the idea of having creating a world out of thin air was very exciting for me. A couple years later, I have an older brother. He also works in this industry. He's 5 years older than I am, and he actually works at Sony ImageWorks. And he was a reason that I started working here, or getting into the field. So when I was about 11 years old, when my brother was off of his computer, I would sneak on, and I would dig around and start learning about it as much as I could. It was, at that time, this was the Amiga 3000. It was top of the line, 2 floppy drives. It's amazing. I don't remember how much memory there was. But he installed this 3D application called Imagine 3D. This is the first 3D application that I actually got my hands on. And it was, seeing the orthographic views, and there was actually a perspective view that you can move around. It was amazing. So I found myself spending, every moment I could. When he wasn't on it, I would be on it, and just learning about modeling and just kind of conceptualizing what 3D space meant, and it just felt very natural. And I always had a very strong instinct to build things. I think if I didn't become into this field, I probably would have been a mechanical engineer or carpenter or something. Because I always liked building things. Later on, as technology evolved, we had this, Lightwave 3D, which was probably the package that I was on for the majority of my high school time. I grew up in a open enough town that I managed to convince all my teachers to let me do 3D work for their classes. So a history class, I would say, can I do an animation about, World War I? And I would have tanks, and I would, it was very bad at the time, but they didn't know any better, so yeah. I would do it for art class, obviously, and and even English class. But I managed to create a program at my high school that allowed us to do 3D work. And at around age 16, the closest thing at the school that resembled anything like computer graphics was the photography club. So I joined the photography club, and then I took it over and managed to convince the school to give us a computer. And it was in a closet that was maybe, 5 feet wide. But I would spend my time there after school, and I would be in school, manage to get classes out of class so I could work on it. And then after school, I would stay until the alarm of the school would go off. There were a couple times where the police were called because they would forget that I was locked in the school. So when I would get out, I would have to, push open the alarm door and run for it. But I never got in trouble. And this was, I think just such a great way to grow up doing this thing that I had a strong passion for. Also managed to submit a couple of animations to some film festivals and won those, but there wasn't a lot of CG at the time. And it was about time that I needed to start thinking about university studies. At the time, there were very few programs that had anything to do with graphics. And my parents were much more along the lines of, that sounds like art, and I don't think you can make a living doing art. So why don't you go do some useful thing like engineering? And I ended up going to the University of Texas at Austin, where I got my computer science degree. And it kind of, was a bit of a departure from what I really wanted to do, which was to be more of a pure artist. But I got to learn a lot, and I met a lot of wonderful people there. So this is Austin. This is UT Austin. This is the main campus. It was a beautiful place to be, and I enjoyed it very much. And I had started to forget about my earlier roots of doing this type of thing. So I was starting to focus more on AI and more pure sciencey fields. But my senior year, I had a professor who was sort of a forerunner of computer graphics. His name is Dr. Bruce Naylor. He invented BSP trees, if anybody knows what those are. It's a way of partitioning three-dimensional space for accelerated computation. And he was a huge gaming nerd. He had always wanted to start a gaming company. He's actually started several gaming companies, but they were a little ahead of their time. So I took a graphics class with him, and it sort of reignited my energy into this field. I managed to, working with him, we convinced the university to give us a class to make games. I don't know why, but I somehow always able to charm administrators into letting us do things that typically wouldn't do. So we created a game development class, and we were using the Unreal Engine and started using, and had a kind of a prototype course, which was, at least in our area, the first of its kind. But I think it only lasted that one semester. So, but when I graduated, I had a pretty good idea of like, okay, this is what I want to be doing. This is something I had always done since I was 11 years old. And I just took a little break to get a computer science degree. So afterwards, I was determined to get a job in this field. I didn't know how, but I knew that there were companies that they wanted a demo reel to show what you could do. So without a lot of resources, I ended up working a full-time job afterwards, after I graduated. And then in my spare time, I worked another full-time job, volunteering at a small visual effects commercial house there. We did a couple of short like children's shows and some kind of pro bono work for the university. And in about the span of 8 to 10 months, I was working a total of 100 to 120 hours a week between my two jobs and my passion. My girlfriend, who's now my wife, almost broke up with me. She was like, you can't do this anymore. So right around when she was reaching her limit, I managed to put my demo reel together and sent it off. And after putting kind of all this blood, sweat, and tears and years of working towards this, I sent it out to as many places as I could find. There were a couple game companies in Austin. There was a Real Effects in Dallas and a couple of studios in California. And I didn't hear anything, and it was months had gone by, or like a month and a little more, and I was getting kind of down on myself. I'm like, oh, maybe this isn't going to work out. But then all of a sudden, within 1 week, I had 3 offers from different studios. I guess they just all decided to call at the same time. So trying to decide whether I'm going to stay in Austin, move to Dallas, or move to California, I thought I have to move to California. If I want to do this kind of work, that's the film industry, and that's where I'm going to go. So I packed my bags, I left my girlfriend, and I quit my job, although she was going to move everything later. And with basically no money saved up, I moved across the country on a 2-week contract to work on this movie. So at that time, movie studios were trying to create their own animation division. This was Paramount Pictures' attempt to create an animation studio. And it was a small little place, startup in San Clemente, California, which is a beautiful beach town, and I recommend anyone visiting if they ever get the chance. I lived there for a couple years. So their philosophy for creating a studio was they had a bunch of money, they had a facility, and they had no people. So basically, if you knew anything about 3D, they would hire you on a 2-week contract. And it was a trial by fire type of situation, where if they didn't like you after 2 weeks, they don't renew you. And they never signed you for longer than 2 weeks. So I was living basically, paycheck to paycheck, but that first paycheck was wonderful. Finally able to kind of, establish it, but the production schedule was intense, and the studio was semi-non-existent. I started there as a hair and fur TD. I actually had been doing some hair work on the side. If you notice in this image, all the fuzzy characters I was a part of. It was as difficult as it was working in that place. I learned so much, mainly because we got to build a studio from the ground up. They had facilities. By the time I got there were already some very competent people, some of whom I work with now. And I was fortunate enough to, from that 2-week contract, to end up working there for almost 2 years. Every 2 weeks, you go into the producer's office, he says, okay, we're going to renew your contract. So that was nerve-wracking, but at a certain point, you take what you can get. And I guess the big point I wanted to make with this is, if you really, really want something and if you have a passion for it, you do it and you don't even think about it. It never occurred to me the insane hours I was working. It never seemed to bother me. I was just like, I love doing this stuff. So, we built out their layout department, we helped build out their effects department. By the end, they made me supervisor for the, I think, effects and layout, and I think one of the texturing departments or something. And I was there towards the very end when we shipped the movie. It turned out to be an okay success. But what ended up happening was that by the time we had finished it, we had a studio built. It was humming along. We had built the infrastructure, we built the pipeline, we had a very competent crew trained up, and then Paramount pulled the plug. So we shipped the movie. They turned this into a TV show, and then they decided, they were going to produce this closer to LA, and didn't need us anymore. So, with the experience under my belt, I kind of felt like we could do anything. And shortly after, I took a quick contract gig. I had enough money saved up, and at that point, I felt like my career was okay. And I went to Sony Computer Entertainment, or SCEA, in San Diego, and I did a quick contract there. That place was unique in that when I got that call and they said, hey, could you come down to Sony? I was like, this is great. Sony, they know what they're doing. This is going to be like working in a very professional studio. Well, it turned out it was kind of like a little startup cinematics group within there, and they had a lot of pipeline issues, and luckily I'd just been through that. So was able to help produce a little cinematic, although it never got released for other reasons. But during my time there, I got a phone call from Blizzard, And they just happened to be ramping up their cinematics group. And there just happened to be a big studio, Omission, that had shut down with a lot of people. So the producers knew one another, and they gave them a list of names of people they thought would be useful. So I finished my stint at Sony, and I packed my bags, and I moved, a few miles north to Blizzard. Blizzard has always been a big part of my life, even before I kind of realized who they were. And I remember in high school playing Warcraft II, and spending time with my friends when I could play that and trying to emulate their cinematics. It was always inspirational in the types of worlds that they created. The fact that they take a simple, RTS game and they attach so much story to it and really build out the world from nothing, I thought was very inspirational. When I got there, the first project I got to work on was the Starcraft II announcement, and that was mind-blowing. Walking into that studio when it was, at that time I think cinematics was like 40 some odd people. It had already gotten pretty big. And the first day the producer, he waves me on, he goes, "Come on, let me show you what we're working on." And he pulls me into the office room, starts up the storyboards, and I just see the Starcraft II logo, and my mind just exploded. I was like, I made it. This is unbelievable. So at that time we were working in 3ds Max, and we got to work on this announcement piece that was a surprise to the world. We managed to keep, things are still very secretive, but we managed to keep it under wraps. And I was fortunate enough to have the opportunity to go to South Korea for the announcement of the Starcraft II. And if you've ever seen what Starcraft was like in South Korea, it is a national sport. It is unbelievable. And being there and just seeing the moment that someone found out that you worked at Blizzard and you were an instant celebrity, and it was an awesome feeling. And just being there with all your friends and getting to celebrate your work was just, anyway, it made all the hard work worth it. It made every late night, every broken pipeline, stressful situation completely worth it. And we got to sit in the Olympic Auditorium. We were there on the floor, and then Mike Morheim came up to the stage, and he said hello to the Korean people, and he just said, "We have something to show you." And the lights go down, and the entire stadium of something like 20,000 people just surrounding you, just silent, all black. And then you see the flicker of the light of the cinematics, the first chamber turn on, and it reveals that it's sort of like a high-tech sci-fi world, and you hear the crowd. They don't want to get too excited, but you hear this like, oh, and all around you rumbling, and then you see the sliding doors open up, and you see Tychus come out, and he has that cigar in his mouth, that classic, Starcraft cigar, and he's in shadow, and he takes that first puff, and the crowd is like, oh, they get more excited. And then he steps out, and the music starts to play, and it picks up, and you see his Marine suit being assembled, and you see everything happening, and the crowd goes insane. And he says his line, "Hell, it's about time," except we actually animated it in Korean, so spoken in a native language, and they went berserk. And then the Starcraft II logo came up, and it was a huge celebration. So, coming off that high and kind of realizing where I was very exciting. I was, I don't even remember what my first job was. I think I was doing simulations. I did, and so most of what I did in that scene was his pants, like a little cuff of his pants, and his chain links falling off, and a little bit of bounce and rigid body dynamics and things, and just even having worked on just like that little portion, but really feeling a part of the team was something that I think is what Blizzard is about, which is about working together and being a community. And they spend so much effort to tell stories. And why do we tell stories? Most video games don't bother adding a storyline, and sometimes you don't even. A lot of people say, "Why do we need that? Why are we spending all this effort in trying to create a world when really, people just want to play the game and they want to shoot things, they want to blow stuff up." Well, stories are sort of, all like what makes us human. It's something that, from the first humans, we've wanted to connect to something greater than ourselves. It's sort of leaving a legacy in a way that passes from generation to generation. It connects, information, sort of more the cognitive side to the emotional side. So you get this, you add so much to what was there already. And you ever go camping, you sit around a campfire, the best moments, the best memories are when you're with friends and you can share your experiences and you can tell those stories. And that's what we try very hard to do in our cinematics team. So if you want to be into this type of thing, if you want to tell stories and you want to build cinematics, here's how you do it. There are a lot of moving pieces, and the way we operate is much more akin to a film studio than it is a game studio. We have a very large pipeline that handles lots of data, and it takes a huge team to do sort of the level of work that we aspire to do. So if you're interested in the types of roles that are available, you may want to be a modeler. So the types of things that I think make a good modeler of what I've seen are a very clear understanding of anatomy, very solid traditional art background, and a lot in classical sculpting. The art form has been around for a very long time. The tools have changed, the medium's changed a little bit, but the skill and the artistry is the same. You may work a little bit faster because you're not, carving it out of a rock. But the same principles hold, form and sort of the functionality with the aesthetic. The difference is that you have to, a pure modeler, a pure artist, I think, is necessary. But on top of that, to sort of be great is to understand the technical side of things as well, is to understand what good edge loops are, what good topology is. Because you're not just making the art for yourself. You need to be able to move it down the chain. If it cannot be, rigged and animated and lit, and no one's going to see it. So you really have to, consider yourself as part of more than just yourself. Another thing with modeling is that production art is very different from just personal art. You have to work under very strict deadlines. You have to be able to take direction. You have to be able to switch off or be willing to let things go. You imagine just as doing your personal artwork, somebody walks in and says, okay, that's not any good, you're not going to do that anymore. That can really kill an artist. But that's the type of thing that you may have to deal with just because, constraints change and you have a director. Then down the line, once modeling is finished, surfacing handles it. So at least in Blizzard Cinematics, surfacing is handled by a different department. And they really understand the interaction of materials with lights and how, the types of, how different materials react under different types of lighting conditions, how they blend together. They'll do the texture painting. They'll do, more technical things that need to pass down to lighting. They're the type of people who I see when they walk around outside, they're always looking at the walls or the ground or a tree and like the bark. And it's something that is innate in them. They can't help it. And as soon as, they always have a camera ready to take reference. And that's the kind of person I think makes a great surfacing artist. In addition to, again, a very technical understanding. It's the surfacing artists that I've been privileged to work with are just the nicest people in the world, and they want to make the modeler's art look wonderful. And that passion of being able to combine your art with someone else's art to make something greater than the sum of its parts is very important. Around the same time that surfacing is painting the models, rigging will take over. And I like to think that we're as cool as this guy here, but a rigger is someone who likes to be a part of a sort of an art collective, if you want to say it, but has I guess more strengths in technical things. I was a rigger for a very long time. I still consider myself that, even though I haven't had as much time on the box lately as I did before. A rigger wants to know how something should move. When they look at the anatomy of the character, they're going to ask the modeler, what does that do? Or they see a piece of concept art, what is that little mark there? Is that just a pen stroke, or is that cloth? Is that supposed to behave in some way? Does the animator need it? Rigging connects modeling and animation. We're the go-between, and we need to work really closely with both sides. That's very important. I have a great relationship with the animators, and or I like to think, maybe they don't think that. But Hunter Grant, who spoke here last year, is a good friend of mine, and we work very closely, and I always like to, harass him about the things he asks for. Animators always want more and more, but that's okay. Our job is to give them what they need. They're our clients. And the things I've sort of learned as a rigger is that I have, or my friends as well, other riggers, have this inclination to try to automate a lot of things. And it's finding that balance between what is technically correct, what should be physically correct, and what is necessary for the art to be correct. And those are not always the same thing. So there are plenty of times where we will automate something and the animator goes, no, pull it back. Like, just give me the base controls and we'll go from there. Modeling will, when you work with a good modeler and they just understand topology and they give you exactly what you need, it's a wonderful feeling. But sometimes they don't. And you have to be patient. And it's, if someone is not delivering what you expect, don't hold it against them. They just don't know. And so it's up to you to help them learn and help them to be better. And in return, you'll become better as well. So if you are interested in rigging, sort of the more modern day rigs are much closer to programming code than just actual, in Maya kind of moving things around. You need to have a very strong scripting background. I come from a pretty strong programming background, although there are way better programmers than I am. But and sort of the kind of garage hacky mentality, like the type of person who would, just weld two crazy things together if they didn't have a computer. I knew a guy when I was growing up in my hometown who had next to no education, but was a welder and was an expert welder. And to me, he is the epitome of what rigging should be, where he can see things that people don't see and can connect them and make something that is just, he pulled the engine out of like a giant semi-truck and then like put it into the back of like a small pickup and then, welded like a giant rail across it so that he could cross. It was nuts. The guy was amazing. He actually invented the gooseneck trailer, which I don't know if you people know what it is, but in Texas you see it. So that's rigging. And if you have a good rigger, hopefully your animation life will be a little easier. So our animators are the best animators I've ever seen in my life. They work incredibly fast. They have a understanding of motion and weight and sort of what is natural about the world and how people react. The types of subtleties that they pay attention to, I can't perceive. I'll see in dailies and they'll be looking between two shots and I'm like, they look the same to me, but they see the difference. And I think the type of animation that we've been getting better at and that or at least the stuff that I have more appreciation for are the subtle acting moments where it's just a person staring and these kind of imperceptible muscles of the face that fire, that convey so much emotion without being over the top. But then they also do this amazing, physical animation where they're doing combat and people are being thrown around and there's monsters and there's this giant choreography. Animators they're actors, right? They're actors. They know how to perform, and they come from that background of always kind of hamming it up. They tend to be, at least what I've seen, more goofy around the office. They're always, they can't help but do something like, they'll just be walking down the hall and they'll just burst into some weird walk for no reason and make strange faces at one another, and occasionally you're just kind of like, they're crazy. Like, what is wrong with those people? But they're animators, you know, and if you find that you're maybe that kind of person, it might be something that you want to look into. We also have a department called Previs, which I find is like, it's like animation, but I don't know why I picked that picture, I just thought it was funny. Previsualization is I think, an underappreciated department, and I think maybe some productions don't utilize it as much. I know we didn't for the longest time. Adding previs speeds up everything. So without committing too far towards one particular shot, a previs team can take just bare bones, just scraps out of Maya. Sometimes we don't even give them preliminary rigs, they just go. And they're able to block out a shot and sort of convey the cinematography with just, you know, effectively like stick figures. But they don't have, you know, the characters don't really animate, they just slide across the screen, but the way that they aim the camera and the way that they understand framing and movement and timing is, I think, a very hard skill to pin down. So if you think that you may be more of a cinematographer type and you like composition and you understand, you know, how things should flow from one scene to the next, I think comic book artists, like the people who understand how one panel moves from one to another and just stitching them together makes kind of a cohesive story. That's what a previs artist does. And our previs artists are top-notch. They've worked all over the industry on shows and movies, and they work very closely with the director. So basically, after storyboards are done, the director will say, we'll show the boards and kind of explain what they want, and within a matter of just a few hours, you see it all comes to life, without even going into animation yet. And they're the biggest help to animation, because by the time that animation is ready to start, they already have a great starting point. They know how things should be framed, they know what they need to animate, what they don't need to animate, they know the timing of, how many steps will I get of this character walking across the frame, because we've already worked out this timing. Another department is layout. So layout helps to build the blueprint for the scene. So they'll actually construct the set of wherever your action is taking hold. So when previs kind of finishes, they'll understand the blocking and the placing of trees or other types of objects in the scene. And layout is the glue that kind of holds the production together. So when there's a question of what is in this shot, what do I need? Is that ground high enough? Is there supposed to be lava there? There's a flower missing, I think, and then layout is the keeper of all those things. They archive effectively, they effectively archive the shot. They know when they see a render, they'll know what's missing in that shot. And they're the ones that keep things from slipping through and moving too far down production before, to the point where it's too late to go back. A layout artist is, again, a very technical person, and I think that in a smaller production, you probably wouldn't have a layout. But I highly recommend that you find someone to do that, especially as you work into more complex scenes, more complex shows. When layout is done, so layout is this constant back and forth between animation, and as assets come into production, they'll stub them in and they'll say, hey, we still haven't gotten this piece of grass from this area, and somebody will come in. When layout is pretty much happy, they actually move the assets down the pipe and we get to lighting. Whoa, effects. I'll go back. So my brother is a lighter. He works at Sony ImageWorks. He has numerous films under his belt. And what he is able to see, I can't see. He somehow has a better perception for color. There's this test that you can do online where you get all these tiny swatches and they are all mixed up, and you try to put them in order for a perfect gradient. And I get maybe 80%. I don't do that great. But a lighter knows every hue, every value. Maybe they just have more cones in their eyes, maybe. I think some people do that. And when I've been in dailies where a lighter will see a shot And then 2 weeks later, they'll see it again, and I think it looks the same, but they know, they have that visual memory that I think is amazing. I've never seen anything. You know, I tried sometimes, and I can't get it. I'm like, how did you notice that that is like, you know, like half stop darker than it was before? Like, and they just know, like, that tint of green is not quite right. Like that kind of shaft of light is a little, you know, washing things out. They know what a good composition is. They know what's needed. But then on top of that, they can do things incredibly fast and layer. They paint with light, right? That's sort of what it is. And I think if you've ever worked in a theater and actually done stage lighting, I think it's a really good foundation for becoming a CG lighter. Sort of understanding that, you know, that's the first time that the shot really comes together. The first shot out of lighting is when you're like, wow, this show is going to be awesome. Like, they nailed that look. And I'm a little jealous in the fact that the final frames feel more, you know, closely linked to lighting than it does to rigging. And if you want to see that shot on the screen and says, like, that's mine, like, I, you know, put that together, that's what a lighter does. So maybe that's right for you. Effects. These people love to blow stuff up. I think in reality and on the computer. We have this one guy at work who just loves looking at explosions and fire and debris and, you know, every crazy, like, natural disaster that's ever happened. And he just loves it. It amps him up, you know. And maybe you like that. Maybe you played with firecrackers too much as a kid, you know. Maybe fireworks are just really your thing. But it's not just that. It's a solid understanding of the physical world, how materials work, how, you know, noticing the subtleties of when fire turns to smoke and how much debris goes out, but then adding artistry to that chaos. We do most of our effects in Houdini, but, you know, a lot of packages have different types of dynamics. So there's, you know, there's fluid simulations, there's, you know, destructions, there's RBDs. Those types of things are so fun to play with. And I've only ever really played with them, right? I'll fiddle some knobs and kind of, you know, tune things up and say, isn't that cool? But they can kind of control that into something useful and directable, and that's a skill. So maybe you want to do that. We also have compositing, and typically compositing is done by a lighter as well, and they will take these elements and assemble them together and make things that can't exist in reality, or they can really tighten up that you know, little spot on that specular on your eyes, and maybe just kind of darken the outsides to really make the character punch and feel that there's kind of the last person who's going to deal with the composition of the final image. Our compositors, again, are with lighters as well, but they kind of have more magic tricks. They can pull things out of the hat and do things that that a lighter just can't get because they're more constrained by the physicality of the environment. So I've given you sort of a sampling of the types of things that we have in our pipeline, and, you know, it's kind of in a loose order, but it makes it seem like there's this clear progression. Modeling finishes, surfacing can start, rigging can start, then something moves on to previs, layout helps to kind of organize things, animation gets to move along. Meanwhile, surfacing finishes as animation arrives into lighting. Lighting can start, effects get added on, it all gets comped together. It looks pretty tidy, you know, it's simple. You know, this is kind of like a normal diagram of what you have. But in reality, you know, it's more like this, where things are never as clean in reality as they are in theory. There's back and forth. Things move really far down the chain before they come back. And sometimes decisions get made at the last minute that have, you know, cascading ramifications, when you work in a team as large as we are, cinematics is about 180 people. It's tough to get things right every time, and people's aesthetics and changes every once in a while. And something may look right in one condition and will look just not, totally different. And you have to be able to kind of accept that and adapt. You can't take it, you can't be so bothered by it because it's just natural and it's part of making things better. What we do is when we sort of get a kickback from a downstream department, you're just adding that work on top of your current load. And sometimes it can feel a little overwhelming, or you're like, why are you doing this? Why are you doing this to me? You're hurting us. But really, all anyone is doing is trying to make it better. And you got to understand, like, it's not a personal thing. Everyone's working together to genuinely make things better as much as they can. So these departments that I laid out is really kind of a light subset. These are the actual departments. When you break it out, these are the types of groups, so it's a lot more. And when you try to coordinate that many people, that flow chart looks more like this. And it's a daunting task to try to organize any of this stuff. There are thousands and thousands of assets, and every asset has, dozens of versions, and those all interact in completely different ways. And you need a solid. Without our production team, nothing could happen. We should just go home. And they are so organized, and they can't help but organize things. Like if you just put them in a chaotic environment, they'll just start to organize it because it's in them. So maybe that's what you want to do. We have producers, and then we have production department managers, which help organize the in-between the departments themselves, whereas the show producer will kind of manage the show as a whole. They'll interact with other teams, they'll do the budgets, they do reporting, they're kind of accounting for the department. But maybe you, at the core, are an accountant, but you want to be a part of an artistic group, then you should be a producer. And a good producer is incredibly valuable. And I don't know of too many schools that actually have producers, or like a training for producers. And it's the kind of thing that you can really only get hands-on. There's also coordinators that help keep things smooth between departments. Sometimes artists can get, a little disorganized. I know I tend to be. And you of sort of, a deadline, the type of mentality of like we have to call it done, right? I imagine most of you have an art background. You never want to let go of something. You work on it and you say like, no, it's not done. I can change this and stuff. And a producer needs to come in and just say no, like this is good enough. Like let's move on. We got to get this done. And without them, shows don't finish. A saying that we like is perfect is the enemy of great. And we've discovered that countless times where we iterate way too much on something. More in the past, we've gotten so much better about it. And that is in thanks a lot to our producers and their constant willingness to work with artists who don't really quite think the way they do, who kind of mess up the schedules, but they're there to help. So in my time that I've been at Blizzard, I think I've already shared with you a lot of the things I've learned about the different departments. And it's been 10 years. And one cool thing about working there is that at 5 years you get a sword, like a real sword, and then at 10 years you get a shield. So I'm about to get my shield. It's going to be awesome. And it's huge and it's really heavy. You could hurt somebody with it. You should see our office. It's just littered with weapons and gear. So some of the core lessons I think are learn to take criticism. It's not a bad thing. It's not a reflection of yourself. It's simply someone trying to help. Seek it out. If you ever get to the point that you think, I don't need notes, I know exactly what's right, and I don't care what anyone else says, you're in a bad spot. Like, you need to go find as much feedback as you can. That's how you get better. The best artists I know, some of the, like literally probably one of the top 5 modelers in the world, is constantly going to people and say, does this look right? Do you think this is okay? How about, should I fix this? And when someone, tells them something, you don't necessarily have to take it at face value, but there's something behind what they're saying, right? Why did they say, like, what's wrong with this proportion? I don't think, I think the anatomy is correct, so why did they say that it's incorrect? Oh, maybe because the forearm's a little too long, or maybe this needs to be adjusted, or maybe I could kind of hone out this area, or maybe I put too much detail in this area. And in whatever you do, whether you're an artist, or whether you're a producer, or whether you're a programmer, especially if you're a programmer, you want code review. You want feedback. How do I know if my code's good? I don't know. Like, I gotta go ask somebody else who does the same thing or who knows something about it. Try to find people who are better than you. Don't be threatened, because when we help each other, we all get better. And if you are only surrounded by people who you view as not as good as yourself, then you're not getting any better, and you might as well retire. As a rigger, listen to your animators. They have a lot to say. I kind of touched on this earlier, but they're in the weeds more than I am as a rigger. I think a good rigger will have some animation experience, but you're not going to quite know as much as they do. And I've been in situations where there's a bit of pushback, and they ask for something that I think is insane. I'm like, why would you need this? But ultimately, they're right. They're your customers, and they have their shot deadlines, which are completely different from your deadlines. But then the other thing is, like, don't always listen to your animators, because sometimes every animator has a different opinion, right? Sometimes what one animator wants, another doesn't, and that is untenable for production. You want to, the way that we try to do it is have the leads, all the animators get together, and then the leads kind of decide what is good, what is wrong, and stuff. But sometimes you'll go down a path and it's not correct, and you want to go back. And also, sometimes the animator just needs to be convinced that what you're doing is the better way, and if they give it a shot, they'll try it. We did this with our facial rigs. We tried all kinds of ways, and people kind of get set in one particular paradigm or another, and it's just what they happen to be used to. But maybe if you show them the way, then they'll like it. And so we do, a lot of the way that we work is show, don't tell, like even in production, where people don't just take things for granted. Like, they really want to see that it's a proven technique. And then at a certain point, they'll start to accept it. The other side of taking criticism is giving it. Be constructive with your notes. Sometimes people have bad days, and don't take it out on people. Basically, don't be an asshole. Like, that's a good rule of life. If someone comes to you and they're kind of opening up to you and they can be vulnerable, you can be gentle. You can kind of ease them into how you feel about things. Some people just tend to be naturally opinionated, and they'll tell everyone what they think, whether they want it or not. But be gracious, because that's what you would want from someone else. All right. In this industry also, you want to specialize. It's really great when you're starting out early on, you're working in a small studio, you want to be a generalist, you want to be able to help out and do great things, and that is incredibly valuable. Everybody, I think, at least in CG, starts out as a generalist at some point. Like, I would never call myself a modeler, I'm awful, but I can do it if I have to. It'll just take me forever. So. But when you get to a larger studio, we want people who are amazing at their particular skill. And there's just too much in this world to do. Like, you just cannot be a great animator and a great lighter. You just don't have the time. And just kind of admit that maybe I don't need to prove myself in this one arena. Let things go and say, like find what that passion is, though. Like, what is it that you want to do? Like, I've sort of shown you sort of the breadth of the types of work that you can do in this field, but give them all a try, you know? And when you find the one thing that you do, just go for it and really hone that skill. And find people who maybe aren't good in that field and team up with them and help them with their projects. The best way you make yourself better is by helping other people. When you go to, you know, let's say your first studio gig, and you are, you know, you're starting out, just be the person that everyone goes to for help. Be that expert in that one field. And because that is going to make your next job, you're going to be even more valuable. So and that's going to set you apart from the other people who, you know, just kind of float by, but have gotten lucky or whatnot. But then also, you know, don't specialize too much. You need to know the people around you. You need to know your ecosystem. And so be very, very good at what you do, but know enough about what's around you to empathize with where they're coming from. I recommend to everyone to learn a little bit of programming, because ultimately you are working on a computer. And if you just have that tiny bit of scripting knowledge, you can just speed yourself up. Your process, you know, the best modelers I know are very decent scripters, and they can automate, you know, 2 clicks to 1 click, and they've, you know, increased their production over the day by 10%. You know, they think that way. They think like, this is annoying. Why am I, you know, why do I have to do it this way? And instead of, you know, kind of just throwing your hands up and saying, oh, you know, I can't work, and waiting for somebody else to come fix it, learn to fix your problems, right? And that requires you to have sort of a little broader knowledge. And those are the people, when we're hiring and or when I'm interviewing people, that's the kind of person I want, is the one who doesn't let anything get in their way, who will not just, you know, who's not just so dead set on their one particular task and say, I don't do anything else. If something else becomes a problem, that's not on me. Don't be that person. Also, the shot does not belong to you. The shot is no individuals, except the directors. When you work under a director, you have to accept that their word is law. Your job is not to fight them. That's not to say you can't give feedback. You should, but in the right situation. So if we have a dailies, the worst thing that can happen is someone argues about an issue with the director. It wastes everyone's time, and you're ultimately going to be wrong. And if you've said your piece, leave it. It's not your shot. It's the show that matters. These things, this is production. This is, ultimately, it's work, right? And you can't succeed if you take everything personally and say, this is mine. Kill your darlings, that phrase, right? Something that you can put a lot of work into, and that you spend enough time, and you just love the idea or the character and that theme, and you're just like, oh, I want this to happen. And it just may not work as a whole, right? And it's your job to execute the director's vision. And the best directors are the ones who understand that as well, is that they start from that position of knowing like what it means to help someone else create their vision. So that's, I want to stress that enough, because I see it happen, and when you're in that situation, you may think right now it's like, okay, cool. But when you're actually in that situation, learn to take a breath, meditate, do something, and let it go. And of course, work really, really hard. When I talk to people, it'll be someone who is fresh out of school, or someone who says, hey, my kid really loves gaming and wants to work at Blizzard, or, you know, how do I get there? Blizzard is really not anyone's first studio. At the point that we are at, we try to hire the best, and to become the best, you have to work your way through everything. And when you're at, you know, a smaller place and you're getting that first gig, again, bust your ass, be there all the time. You know, don't like kill your life or anything, but like really, really put your heart and soul into it. You know, when I am consumed with a problem, it's like it's always on my mind. I go home, I think about it. How can I fix it? How can I okay, I can't wait, I got my plan, when I go in the next day, I'm gonna make this work. And then if you find that you're through with your work, go help someone else, right? Because it's a team effort. Like, and I know I'm kind of harping on this team thing a lot, but it's true. And when you are the person that everyone trusts and everyone goes to, I value references very highly. So there are some people who, especially artists, tend to be more introverted, and they're not necessarily good on an interview. But if someone who has worked with them is like, that person is amazing, like they help with any problem, like we get it done because of that person, then I don't care if you're a bad interview. Like, I'm going to trust other people's opinions, and that means a lot. And the way you become that person is you bust your ass, you work hard. It's simple. But learn to live your life. Don't work too hard. So again, it's balance, and it's easy to burn out. And when you're younger, you can burn the candle at both ends. And I mean, when I was in school, I would work literally like 3 days straight. I'd take a nap in the lab, and I just go, go, go. But as you get older, there's a work-life balance, right? You want a family, or you start a relationship, and you can't give up everything. You're a person, right? You're not a machine, and you have to have both of those elements. But it becomes, when you start getting in the habit of when you're young and you work all the time, and that is a good thing. As you get older and your values change and time commitments change, learn to say no to things when you've really kind of made it, and know that you are in a position to accept help as well. Lean on your friends when you need to, but don't be the guy. Don't take advantage of other people, of course. But again, you lean on each other. We're all stronger together. So those are the things I've learned in my career and time doing this business. So if there's any questions, take them.
See if we can get the sound on. Yes. So this is a great opportunity to ask some questions from Jim. So just raise your hand. And of course, if you're asking about the next secret Blizzard project, Jim might not have an answer, but you can of course give it a try. But of course, there's many things that Jim can talk about. So first question.
Hey, Jim.
Hey.
Just a question that I came to think about when you thought about producers and your earlier career, because you were helping and supervising even earlier in your career.
Mm-hmm.
So what do you think is a big problem with the seniors and supervisors and the producer of a specific team?
I'm not sure I understand the question.
Oh man, I need to try harder. So you have a specific producers in your animation department, right?
Mm-hmm.
So what do the producers do exactly? How are they different from like senior workers?
Okay, so the producer deals more with sort of the business side of things. So they'll look at the budgets and the schedules, and they help with the time allocation. Whereas the supervisors deal with more artist-facing, like solving the problems, like on a bit day-to-day. And the way that we have, or at least the way that we're structured, we have leads that are kind of like the supervisors per show. Like they take on the responsibility and are the point person for a particular show, because we work on multiple at a time. So it can be, it's useful to have someone in a particular department that you can go to and say, what's going on with Warcraft for this, and they'll know, instead of having to go around and ask everybody. But yeah, we just try to keep communication very open. So yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah, the producers play with spreadsheets more. That's really it.
Yeah, kind of related to that. You said like there's so many specific like talents that you can do, and so many specific professions. So I wonder, like, is there always the same amount of work for all of them? Like, do you ever run out of things to do, or do you jump on a different project? What happens?
It depends on your pipeline. If they keep their department busy, or if they utilize resources, there's downtime. There's always downtime, and in that downtime, if you're more on the tech side, you're trying to improve your process. Occasionally, if artists have, we rarely have downtime because we are working on so many shows at a time. But in those rare events, then you practice. You can do personal art. They'll do art jams, and everybody has a week before the next big thing kicks in, or they don't have inventory yet, and everyone does like a sculpt, like a personal thing, and then they all share it, and you kind of learn from each other. Do something that you wouldn't normally get to do just because you're busy. But yeah, I mean, it happens where, but if the scheduling is done right, then people are usually kept busy. Or take a vacation.
Okay,
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah. Come to Finland and talk about stuff.
You said in the dailies you sometimes watch live. Big your dailies are. It's like how many people?
It varies. So we have a lot of dailies. We have like animation dailies, and then we'll have asset dailies, and we'll have show dailies, like director dailies, which is more lighting. So we keep it to the people that are directly on basically the last step of that shot. Because anything that's prior to that, we should have already picked up, and if we don't, so there'll be, a lot of times there'll be like a layout person in the lighting dailies, or a surfacing person, sort of the adjacent departments, just to make sure things run smoothly. And the closer you get to the end, the more fine-tuned it happens to be. So if a lighter is, for instance, a surfacing person will sit in on the whole thing, and a lighter just comes in for their shot, and their shot's done, they go back to work, and that kind of thing. But it depends. Yeah.
All right, who wants to go next?
You can ask me about my dog. It's great.
Yeah. How many years have you been working at Blizzard, and how has your role changed during that time?
It's been 10 years. I have a weird career. So I've done a bunch of different things and worked in a lot of different departments. So my time there has been mostly doing rigging, but then also I helped develop our hair system early on, or just sort of like the grooming kind of prototyping before other people took it over. And I helped with establishing our facial rig, although that's rigging. I've recently moved into the in-game cinematics group, which does more of the stuff that plays in game. Sometimes it's known as machinima, but it's enough custom that's not technically machinima. But so I've been helping with that. I've been trying to get our rigging systems expanded to other teams, so not just cinematics, like trying to get the games teams to start integrating them, because in the in-game cinematic side, we use game assets, and then we up-res them, we modify them. But if they're on a similar, not full pipeline, but if they're on a similar asset type, then it's easier to transfer stuff. So there's a lot of wins there, but yeah. 10 years too. Yeah.
Any more questions?
I have a short, less serious one, which is interesting to me personally. So you've been working in the games industry for a long time, and you said about work-life balance. Do you find time to play games? And if so, what are you playing right now?
At lunch, I will almost always play Overwatch, occasionally Heroes. Since Legion's come out, I've been really into that. But I find that I can eat up too much time doing that. So after work, I'll catch a game or something, or maybe if there's a quest line I need to finish real quick, I'll log in to WoW at lunch or a little bit after work. But yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
so mostly Blizzard games.
Yeah. I mean, I love all kinds of games, but it just coincidentally it just happens, And I love Overwatch. Though Overwatch is great. And when I'm at home or on the weekends, I'll play. I have two boys. And we'll play Diablo on console, so I'm total Blizzard fanboy. Yeah, and it's kind of, and my kids are being raised that way too. Although we also play Rocket League and
Okay, but
Minecraft
good to hear
stuff,
there's some time for games as well.
Yeah.
Not just making.
Oh yeah, there's always we find time, and I cook a lot, and I like to barbecue. I have this 50-gallon drum smoker, and I'll cook big chunks of meat and stuff, and I like smoking meat and feeding people. That's another hobby of mine.
final questions?
Thanks, everybody. You're so quiet. I hope this is useful.
Okay.
So you were talking about moving to in-game cinematics.
Mm-hmm.
So those I am familiar with, but can you give more examples of like out-game cinematics that you do?
So cinematics there's like pre-rendered, which are the sort of the Overwatch pieces, the like the big WoW intros, and then the in-game cinematics are the ones that look like they're in engine, where they're actually rendered in engine, but we actually bake out frames and then replace. Yeah, so that's the difference. Yeah, I mean the balance is we're always trying to push the in-game look, but we can't deviate too much from what the game actually looks like because it'll be kind of jarring for the player to be in the middle of that.
I like the highlighting throws in Overwatch. Those are in-engine.
Those are actually the team themselves. Yeah, that's in engine. Okay. Yeah. Most of the in-game cinematics are like the Heroes of the Storms, like the Heroes trailers and the things where like the I think the most recent one was like the Machines of War, where it's like the Starcraft skins and all that stuff for heroes. And then WoW, we've done so many like story moments in this latest one. How many people play WoW? A few? Yeah, if you've played Legion, we've added like a lot of big story moments, and we've been trying to, or we've been building a lot of trust with the game team, and they're really excited about how much story we've been able to add to it. So that's been good.
Okay, I have a question. What is your Blizzard studio? I understand you have like 2,000 people there or more.
We're core, like our development main group is in Irvine, California. Yeah.
Okay, so is it like what kind of place is that? You said you have swords everywhere. And
okay. So like culture, it's we like to have fun. I mean, we have and we love art. And there's a giant orc statue in the middle of the stadium. I think you saw that. And I think to me the BlizzCon is the best representation of our culture. Recently, I think as of a year ago, all the people who work the convention are Blizzard employees now. So we used to have temporary staff that, and it was better to have people who really knew the story, like knew the IPs, and the whole point of BlizzCon is to connect with people, is to connect with our fans, is so that we have such wonderful fans, and they. Getting that chance to, on a human level, like face to face, and talk to them, and you just see that excitement, and it's the best feeling. It just really just recharges you because you're like, you'll have some long hours, and it's all worth it when you see. And I think what I've seen lately is like generations of people. So there was one time at a BlizzCon where it was a child, his parents, and grandparents, and they all played WoW together. And just seeing how their grandparents live further away, but they work together, and they were like, I think it was some mount that they got for I think one of the grandparents' birthdays, and they were just so excited about that, and just it connects them. And it's like, how often do kids play with their grandparents? And now I can do it over a network. And yeah, there's just so many stories of people who've made life connections that way. There was a couple, so we do signings whenever we launch a game, or not always, but sometimes we'll have like box signings, and people will come, and I met a couple who they met in WoW, got married, and now have 2 children, and now those kids are getting old enough to start playing WoW. Like, we've been around, so, and we've helped make babies, I'm gonna say that, yeah. So. It's all about love, man. Yeah.
Keep doing what you do.
Yeah.
Any questions in the back? We noticed that we have a couple of questions from the streamers, so we could take a look at those briefly. Let's see. So, one question here. When you are in a starter project with, say, 5 people and you disagree on some topic, how you should decide? Should there be one person who decides above everyone?
That's hard. Yeah, there's no magic answer for that. If you are in a small group, and yeah, it's a personal thing. I've been in situations with small groups, and sometimes you're just going to have to lose somebody. Sometimes someone just cannot get along with people, or usually what I realize is if someone's having a really hard time, it tends to not be about the thing they're mad about. And if the criticism does not come with anger or malice, then it can be worked out. If it comes with anger, it's usually some other reason that's causing it. Just something maybe going on with their life, and you may have to just be the bigger person and try to be more diplomatic through the situation. But it depends on your dynamic. If it's friends, especially, that's very hard. But go get drunk and then talk it out. Sorry, maybe I shouldn't recommend drinking so much, but it's you just need to hash it out sometimes, and it depends. Yeah, if I knew that, I'd write a book or something.
All right. Anything else?
Good. If you think of something later, I'll be hanging around, whatever.
Yeah, I guess if we have no more questions, we'll give a big hand to Jim.
Thank you.
So this was great, and as usual, we will continue in the cafeteria behind the corner. So if you have any questions you felt too shy to ask here publicly, maybe we'll have a chance to continue the discussion there. Is the list of attendance somewhere, then somewhere, then somewhere, then somewhere?